Right, so it's time for demo number 2 and number 3 for our density chapter. So let's get to it. Just as a review, what is density? It is a measurement of how much what? How much mass. Yes, I knew you knew that. How much mass is contained in a certain what? I think I heard you say volume, and if you did, you were correct. So it's a measurement of how much mass is contained in a certain volume of a substance. Okay, quick review of demo 1 from yesterday. We had the cherry vanilla Pepsi and the regular Pepsi and the Diet Pepsi. And you observed that the Diet Pepsi was floating. Now notice the format here. It starts with I observed, therefore, let's see, I want to erase that. So I observed, therefore, so I infer. So this is the I observed, so I infer format. So I observed the Diet Pepsi floating on top of the water, so I infer that the Diet, well, it's supposed to say Pepsi, Diet Pepsi is less dense than the water. You could use Diet Coke if you do it yourself. You can do it in the bathtub. You don't have to have a fish tank or anything. And then secondly, we observe the cherry vanilla Pepsi sinking to the bottom, so I infer that the Coke is, well, cherry Pepsi, cherry vanilla Pepsi, CV Pepsi, is more dense than the water. And then the regular soda was kind of at the top, but just underneath the surface. So you're going to write out the I observed, so I infer for the regular Pepsi. That was a review. You should have done that yesterday. Alright, let's move on to today. Demo number 2 has to do with hot water and cold water. So before we get into all of that, let's take a look at how this plays out in real life. Red was on top and blue was on bottom. So when you sketch this out on your worksheet in the box provided, that big square box on the left-hand side, you're going to sketch something that looks something like this. But you can make it look much more artsy than what I did. Mine's pretty much chicken scratch. And so you observed that the blue cold water was sinking to the bottom. So you infer that the blue cold water is more dense than the clear room temperature water, which we put the blue water into. So that was your first observation. Your second observation should go something like this. I observed the red, warm water floating on the top, so I infer that the red hot water is less dense than the clear room temperature water. So that's what your observations, your I observed, so I infer statements should read for demo number 2. Now demo number 3 you may have seen already in our live class recording. I'm going to post that video in here as well, just in case you're watching this first and watching the recorded live class second. Cool. Alright, here's demo 3. Let's take a look at the video.
So what you see here is I have taken 3 standard, well, these are seltzer bottles, plastic seltzer bottles that I got at the store for like 67 cents or 69 cents or something. And I simply cut the top off. So now I have a funnel that I can use to fill in stuff, but you gotta be careful that it doesn't fall in there. And they're all filled up with just tap water to the same level. So what you need, the materials you need for this lab experiment are 3 containers that can hold water, something to stir with. I got this ladle here. You'll see why the ladle comes in very handy later. We need salt. And it doesn't have to be kosher salt. It can be any kind of table salt. And the last thing that we need, of course, are 3 eggs. You can do just 1 egg if you want to, but 3 eggs work great. So you can see them all at the same time. So we're going to add some salt to 2 of our containers. We're going to add a little bit of salt to this one and a lot of salt to that one. We're going to leave the first one empty. So we can go ahead and put our egg in water, and we'll see if it floats or if it sinks. And that will tell us something about the egg and versus the water. It'll tell us what is more dense. So if the egg sinks, then that means it's more dense than the water. Just got to try to get my ladle out. There we go. So the egg has sunk all the way to the bottom. So that tells us something. It tells us that clearly that egg is much more dense than the water is. So now I got to open our salt. And these salt boxes are pretty cool because they have a little spout on them, which you can kind of see there if I take her off. See the spout? You may have one of these at home. So we're going to go ahead and start adding some salt. I don't really need a funnel for this because it's got that nice spout on it. Alright, so we'll stop there. Just kind of have to experiment around. So as we add salt to the water, we've got to stir it so it'll dissolve. And we're increasing the density of the water by adding the salt. Might take a little while for it to dissolve. Might have been a good idea to measure. At least I'd know how much I put in here, and I could put more or less in the third. But we'll see what happens. Takes a while to dissolve salt, especially the kosher kind, and I bought the coarse kind, I'm just realizing now. So the salt crystals are pretty chunky, so it takes them a while to dissolve in the water, but they eventually will. So any of the salt that hasn't dissolved will probably float down to the bottom. Get another egg. All right, so our second egg is now floating at the top, and let's get one last egg. Already done some stirring here. Let's see if we can get it to suspend in the middle. not quite what we wanted. I'll be right back. I'm going to go dilute this with some water. Perfecto. Look at that. It's floating. It's floating. Cool. So no salt. No salt in here. A lot of salt in here. And somewhere in between these two is this one here, where the egg is actually floating.
Alright, so basically you should have seen something along this line where we had regular water with no salt in it. The egg was down here at the bottom. And then we had the container with a lot of salt in it, and so the egg was floating up here near the top. And then we had a container with a moderate amount of salt, and so the egg kind of floated in between the top and the bottom, kind of in the middle somewhere. Okay, so that's something you can do at home as well, if you like doing those kinds of things, and see it for yourself. So we need to write out some I observed, so I infer statements. Now you'll notice in your worksheet that if you go to page, it's either page, I think it's page 2, yeah, page 2, you'll see that there's an empty box. You can draw in the 3 containers containing the eggs and where they were located in the box on the left, and then the lines provide you room to write your I infer, so I observe, so I infer statements. So you're going to have 3 of those. You're going to have one for here, for this first container with the regular water. You're going to have another statement for number 2, and you're going to have a third statement for number 3. So you do need 3 statements that begin with I observe. You need to say what you observe, and then so I infer that something about the density of the egg versus the density of the water. Okay, so you'll write those 3 out. I'm not going to tell you how to write them out. I want you to do it on your own, and that's what you'll turn in, and I'll be looking at those for a grade.